Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals, to state senators, to mayors, to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
Hi, AHP listeners. This is Rachel Walsh, the producer of the show. Today, we have a very special episode to share with you as co-host Ryan Coonerty interviews New Deal alumna and former Georgia House Democratic leader Stacey Abrams. This episode was recorded live at the annual New Deal Forum Ideas Summit in Atlanta, Georgia, where Abrams took the stage to talk about her own podcast, Assembly Required, how she stays grounded through challenging political times, and her advice for turning momentum into tangible results. If you enjoy this episode, be sure to check out other episodes of An Honorable Profession with state and local leaders, policy experts, and politicos who offer an authentic look at life in elected office and share their thoughts on how to move the country forward. Enjoy.
Hello, New Deal. We are extremely fortunate to have Stacey Abrams, who not only has done so much national work, but sat in the seat that many people in this room sat in as a state legislator, trying to figure out ways to forge compromise, move policy forward. But I also have to say, as part of the introduction, I am the son and brother of an independent bookstore owner, and Stacey was there last year to promote one of her works of fiction, and she is a great lover of books and a fantastic fiction writer, and a supporter of independent bookstores. That is also an important part of the role you play for all of us. I want to start by asking, I listen to your podcast, Assembly Required.
Thank you.
And I use it to feel grounded in what feels like daily chaos that we are all managing through, because it's in-depth, it's detail-oriented, it's human. And my question is, where do you go to start to be grounded in these times? How are you managing the chaos as just a human being as we manage these days?
Well, first of all, thank you for the very kind welcome. Thank you to Phil. Thank you all for having me. So I'm not just being self-aggrandizing. I go to the podcast. It's a really neat way to get to talk to everyone you've ever wanted to. You just say, come be on my podcast instead of let me stalk you. See? Works very differently. And for me, the point of the podcast, which is known as Assembly Required, available in wherever you get your podcast, please subscribe and say you like it. The point of the podcast is to take these big, audacious, overwhelming issues and break them down so that we remember we've been through hard things before. And so I do, it's not that I go to my podcast to do it, but I leverage the ability to have this podcast as a way to learn about things that I care about but don't know enough about, to push questions and to source answers for complex issues. And then sometimes to just talk to people who help me stabilize. So recently I had Ryan Holiday on, who is just, if you don't read the Daily Stoic or listen to his podcast, he's written a series of books. I think history is incredibly important, especially in times like this. I think philosophy is important. And he does this very nimble job of weaving those two together in a way that helps us understand where we are, but reminds us that it's going to take work to get beyond it. And for me, that is the source of calm. When you know that you're not alone in something, but when you also know that you're not the one who has to create the answer. You have to curate it, but you don't have to create it. I think that is a very calming way to navigate this moment.
I totally agree. And by the way, New Deal has a podcast, an honorable profession. Debbie and I are, and we do not have
Also
Ryan,
available where you get your podcast.
absolutely, and we don't have John Legend or Ryan Holiday on there, but we have all of you. So I encourage you all to subscribe and listen and learn about what New Dealers are doing around the country to address things. I mean, you just talked about coming up with questions on your podcast. We just had a session about having hard conversations, and that having hard conversations is not often served. You aren't often served well by having answers, but by coming with questions. I guess, as a former state legislator, what are the questions that local and state elected officials should be asking of themselves, of their constituents, of the party right now as we gear up for another election cycle?
When I was in law school, I was the research assistant for a tax professor, and she gave me this taxonomy to use when I was doing research for her. She said, your first question is, what's the problem? Why is it a problem? And then how do you solve it? And so often in the legislature, we start at the end. We start with a solution in search of a problem, and then we find data to support the reason we had a problem to solve. And I think our first responsibility is to really be clear about what is the problem, be able to articulate it in simplistic terms, not in reductive terms, but in simple terms. Because the way people often experience these problems, it's very visceral, and so we have to be able to understand it. But then we have to do the hard work of understanding why is it a problem. Because too often we're solving for something that is not what's actually at stake. The example I use is, you see someone on the side of the road, they tell you they're desperate to get to the doctor, but their car won't move. And we say, oh, I've got you. And we rush and get them a can of gas. And we get back and we find out someone stole their engine. Gas is great. It does nothing to solve this problem. And because we didn't take the time to actually understand why it was a problem, our solutions may be good for something, but they're not good for this. And then when you're talking to your constituents, when you're talking to your colleagues, you lose the thread of the argument because you're not solving for what they need. And often our constituents can't articulate what they need, but they can tell you why they need it. And that's the hardest part of the work. It's listening to why it is a problem. Because sometimes the answer isn't that you need a can of gas or even need a new engine. Maybe I just need a ride. But if we're not trying to solve for their problem, if we don't ask that question, we miss the narrative. And then those who are watching us for solutions think that we just don't get it. And it's not that we don't get it, it's that we didn't take the time to hear it and to process it. And I think that's the last piece. We can't fix everything. I mean, you've heard me say this on the podcast. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once is a fantastic movie title. It is a terrible mission statement. And I will say this, Governor Pritzker recently said we have to be able to do lots of things at once. But what I think was embedded in that is that all of us together can do everything, but individually we can't. But if we each pick the thing we can do, if we harness the skills that we have and we focus on our area of the world, if we're all doing that together at once, then yes, it can be done. But too often we try to come up with solutions that solve everything everywhere all at once, and thereby we overwhelm or we miss the boat. And our responsibility is to accept that we can't do it all and then be clear about why all of it can't be done at one time.
So once we've asked that question and we've identified the actual problem our constituents want to solve, in terms of turning that into legislation and policy, this morning I taped 3 podcasts, 3 state legislators in 3 red states. And the struggle that they have to even get to basic facts, much less move legislation, is real. Can you talk about strategies for then translating the constituents' needs, society's needs, into real policy when you have a hostile federal government, hostile governor, hostile majority, hostile.
We often start with the victory in mind. How do we win? But our success comes when we start with our values. If we know what our values are, if we know why we are doing this, what we believe in, the victory will come. It may not come immediately, but you'll get there. But people will go with you if they understand the values that are driving you. And that seems counterintuitive. And I see a number of my colleagues from the Georgia House and the Senate. I mean, Elena deserted us, but it's okay. But when I was leader in the House, it was hard because you can't fight every fight. You can't win every fight. You can't even win every argument with yourself. And so the underlying question was, what are the values that we hold? When I was leader, I made certain we had a set of values that we could all repeat, that we talked about education, economic progress, and that it was about shared responsibility. Those were value statements that could then be used to explain to our opponents and sometimes our allies why we were taking the positions we were taking. If you are in the minority, you have to compromise your vision. You cannot get everything you know you deserve and that your people deserve. But you can never compromise your values. That's when you lose trust, when you lose faith, and you lose ground. Because when someone knows you will compromise your values on one thing, they have no reason to believe that those values won't be compromised on something else. And so when you're in the minority, part of the responsibility when you're having hard conversations is to not talk about the issue or the data. What are the values that are driving this conversation? The values around why healthcare matters. So you're not arguing about whether there should be means testing or that you have to have work requirements for Medicaid. So what value are you trying to prescribe and what values are they ignoring? We too often on our side of the aisle try to talk about things in terms of data. Where they defeat us over and over again is they talk about values. They may not believe those values, they may not hold those values, they may not even recognize those values if they're sitting next to them on a bench, but they're really good at talking about them. We're very good at living them, but we're terrible at articulating them because we don't want to offend anyone with our values. When we hold our values high, when we hold them strong, and when we promote our values, then people start to trust our policies. But our policies are irrelevant if they don't speak to the values that people are afraid are being eroded or they don't think are being seen. And so I start there. And in a practical way, it gives you something to talk about. When you are having a conversation, bless you, about values with someone, then they feel like they're part of the conversation, but they also feel like they're part of the solution. And that can be the lobbyist, that can be your colleague from the other side of the aisle, that can be your colleague on your side of the aisle, but from a different planet, where you're trying to figure out why can't we get to the same place? And it's often because you're starting with the politics of it and not the policy and the values of what you're trying to accomplish. And that can feel a bit too esoteric, and I can get more specific if you want.
Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the things I'm interested in is talking about our values in a way to our colleagues and to our constituents, but also in a world where algorithms de-emphasize values and emphasize conflict, fear, and other emotions. How do you take those conversations and get them at scale?
So let's talk about transgender children. That's an example. The fundamental value is humanity. How do we see the humanity of those around us? And what responsibility do we have to children? Instead of getting pulled into the algorithm fight that they want us to have about gender and sexual orientation and identity, let's go back to first principles. What do we owe our children? What do we owe our communities? And what do we want to show them? That's when you can start the conversation, but we start either with the fight, and we too often accept their premise for the argument. That's the other piece. We spend a lot of time fighting their fights, trying to get them to like us. That's not the point. I don't need you to like me. I need you to agree. Actually, I need you to align with me. Agreement is a luxury. Raise your hand if you've actually ever won an argument and just not worn somebody down and they just walked away. We don't win arguments. We win the moment, but we rarely win the argument. Instead of arguing their premise, instead of letting them guide our conversation and guide our meaning and guide our values, we have to have the courage of our convictions And we have to have the willingness to actually share them and risk someone not liking it. Because the more you talk about those values, I mean, think about the moment we're in. We are sitting in the middle of the fall of democracy led by a tyrant and Donald Trump. Let's be clear. We are sitting in a moment where we are arguing about whether the Constitution has to be followed. And that's because for the last 60 years, a tiny cohort has built their power by believing in their values. I may eschew their values and find their values to be anathema to everything I hold to be true as an American, but they've never wavered in their values. And they've changed the debate so much that we are now fighting over whether or not due process is a right in this country. And that's because they hold their values. We are too willing to compromise our values to get to victory, or we compromise our values because we don't think they're the right ones, or we're afraid people might not like it. There are those who will tell a lie 1,000 times until it sounds like the truth. We tell the truth one time, and when people don't applaud, we stop talking, or we start changing our language to appease them. You can't appease someone who doesn't share your values. They don't want your agreement, they want your annihilation. And so trying to make your values align with theirs means they're not really values, they're just commentary. And so I think our success in the next election, but more importantly in the next wave of democracy, is that we actually know what our values are. We interrogate them, we write them down, we fix the algorithm by flooding the algorithm with our value statements. We don't stop talking because we've got 5 followers. We have 5, and then we have 15, and then we have 500, and we do the work of making sure that we are flooding the algorithm with our shared values. Not arguing over the minutia of how those values are expressed, but making certain people know what we are and what we believe, and use that as the lever to get to what we can do with power if we ever get it again. That's how I think you lead with values.
Thank you. And what are the values the Democratic Party needs to be clear and unapologetic in articulating right now?
So we are having a debate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. And there are like 10 of you who just recoiled that I said DEI. Like, oh my God, we're not, because you read the poll that said, we don't do DEI. And there's I'm trying to remember where I saw it or read it, but there was a guy who said, there go my people, I must follow so I can lead them. It's this idea. We use polling to tell us what we think, as opposed to tell us where people are so we can figure out where we need to take them. I talk about DEI because those are foundational values that have stood this nation in good stead for 249 years. The first practitioners of DEI fought a revolutionary war because they believed that they were being excluded, that there was not equity, and that their diversity was not being recognized and respected. And so they fought a war to create this country. And for 249 years, we have been fighting for the values of diversity, meaning all people. Equity, meaning a fair opportunity to have access to the American dream. And inclusion, meaning that no one should be left out if they're willing to be a part. Those are values that we have to believe in, now more than ever, because if you look at the script of autocracy, you start by winning an election. In the 21st century, autocrats come to power by winning an election and then making sure that no one else gets to have one. The second thing they do is they neutralize the courts and they neutralize the judiciary. They demonize the critical press and they amplify their echo chamber. They displace civil servants and replace them with loyalists. And they put people whose fealty is to them and not to the country in positions of power. And once you've done all that, you then have to point people to a villain. And the villain that you go after is the vulnerable, the dispossessed. You go after the marginalized because no one's going to protect them because they are too hard to protect. If we have the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we know that we're on the step that comes right before the end of democracy. Because when they can convince everyone else that the problem in your life is an immigrant, that the reason you don't have everything you need is because a woman of color got a job, when we can distract and distort, then they win. And they use that as one of the final steps of tyranny, because when you can convince everyone, and I don't think this sounds familiar to anyone who's ever read history, but when you can convince a population that all of their problems can be solved if the people they've long ignored we get rid of them, that's when you no longer have to fight. Because you've now taken away the last shred of humanity that held us together. And so for me, the fundamental values that will restore this nation, that will build the nation we deserve even stronger, are diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I will say DEI over and over again, because you cannot fight a fight if you won't use the language that the other guy is using. You're not going to scare me out of saying it because it polled poorly. So I'm a little passionate about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stacey Abrams.
Thank you.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,